You're listening to a podcast by Change My Relationship, featuring licensed marriage and family therapist and author Carla Downing. These podcasts are designed to provide you with practical solutions based on biblical truths for all your relationships. Today, Carla will be interviewing a guest who has experienced a relationship problem and successfully worked through it.
Welcome to Change My Relationship podcast. One of my favorite things to do is to interview somebody who has worked through a particular life or relationship challenge and to get their story and their insights. And today I have Wendy, who is going to be talking to us about living with a chronic illness. And Wendy is a friend of mine. I've met her through my classes, and we've known each other for about 12 years. So I've watched her walk through a lot of this journey she's going to be talking about. I'm really excited that she said yes. So welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
So let's just get right into your story. Can you describe the type of chronic illness you live with and when you were first diagnosed?
I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis in 2002. I actually came out of a physically abusive relationship, and very soon after I was diagnosed with it. And I went on what they call a biologic medicine in 2005. And basically I did okay after that. I mean, it was livable and I could function. And unfortunately, it got worse, and I have not been able to function for probably about 8 years, not function well anyway. But it was diagnosed quite some time ago.
So when you're saying you have rheumatoid arthritis, give people an idea of what type of debilitation that does. Is it pain? Is it like physically not being able to use certain parts of your body?
Well, rheumatoid arthritis is quite different in everybody's body, but it's a debilitating disease because rheumatism comes in and it kind of, I guess you could say, eats away at your joints. And so it will eventually cripple you permanently. And the slower you can have the disease go, the better. So they call it a biologic, which it's just medicine that you go get, for an IV, or you can do shots. I've done both, and try to slow the progression of the rheumatoid arthritis, but that's where it is. And unfortunately, when you're on, the other medicines, I have unfortunately gotten other autoimmune diseases as a course with the rheumatoid arthritis and throughout that time.
Okay, so it's just, there's some of your, it's hard, it would be hard for you to walk through Disneyland.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And there are times when your knees, I know from being around you, when your knees are really swollen and they have fluid in them, and you might have to use a cane.
Correct. Or a walker. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then you've got pain in your fingers, right? And some of your joints, to where it would be really difficult for you to type all day long.
Right.
And maybe type at all on a day when they're really inflamed.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then I've watched you be kind of prone to having, like, for instance, when you picked your dog up, remember, what was it that you were going to do? You were going to show your dog outside the window or something like that, and you picked him up?
That's kind of a cute story, though. I mean, I had this bird, and I named it Knock Knock, and it was very unusual. This bird would just come up on the branch and knock at the window, and it did it for like 2 weeks straight, and I thought it was so cute. So of course I wanted to pick up my dog and show him the bird, but I don't always think about how fragile my body is, and so, or can be, depending on the day. And so I picked up the dog, and then my sciatic nerve on my right side just went out and I couldn't walk.
And then remember you ripped your rotator cuff or something? Wasn't it picking up your dog a second time when you...
No, I just did the same thing again.
You did the same thing and you tore your rotator cuff, right?
No, I didn't tear anything, but I just did the same thing with my sciatic nerve, but it was worse.
Okay.
And so after I picked him up the first time, and then all of a sudden I picked him up the next time, and I talked to you and you're like, why'd you do it again? And it's just... You don't know what day you're going to be okay and what day you're not. And even if you feel like you're in pain, which is pretty much every day. It's just there's different degrees of flexibility in your body. And so sometimes it can affect you and sometimes it can't. So it doesn't really give you a rule of thumb going, oh, okay, I have rheumatoid arthritis and I also have fibromyalgia too, but I have those things. And so I can't do this ever. It's not really laid out that way. So sometimes I don't know if I can or I can't until I do it.
Right. And how old is your dog? I mean, how much does your dog weigh?
Oh, he's a good 40 pounds.
Oh, okay. So you're picking up 40 pounds. And I mean, but picking up 40 pounds at your age, you're not
I should
old.
be fine.
You should be fine. Picking up a dog.
I'm a little older.
But I mean, you're not old. I just want people to get, since they're not seeing us, I want them to get an idea of like, you're young.
Well, I'm 55 or almost 55.
And that was a couple of years ago, but picking up a 40-pound dog and just showing him the window is not a big deal for somebody who's your age.
Exactly.
But when you have rheumatoid arthritis, that became an illness that literally put you in bed and in severe pain. And and had limitations in your life. So,
right.
I mean, that's one of the things that the illness does for you too, is that it gives you not just the rheumatoid and the fibromyalgia and then the secondary lupus, but you get all these other injuries just from being really fragile in your body and not knowing how it's going to affect you.
Right.
So then rheumatoid is going to be like pain in your joints, right? Achiness.
Right.
Fibromyalgia makes you achy, really achy, and just all over in your body. So you're going to have, you have pain in your joints, you have the fibromyalgia, which is the achiness, the pain, neuropathy.
Right.
Yeah. And you get migraines. So there's often other kinds of things that go along with it where your body becomes really sensitive to things.
Right.
So are there other things that go along with that kind of for you?
Well, they have diagnosed me with diabetes. They're not sure if it's medication induced, where it could be the medication that brought on the diabetes. And if that's the case, because I'm just recently getting off of prednisone. So once I've been off prednisone for 3 months, they'll kind of have an idea on whether that diabetes is going to stay that way or it was just medication induced. And that's the same with the neuropathy. But right now I'm diagnosed with it and I'm living with that as well.
Yeah. Definitely. Really hard. Well, we're going to get into how this affects your life and all of that. So that gives them people a good idea of what you're dealing with. So that is the next question. How has chronic illness impacted your life?
Well, that's a huge question, I will say, but let me break it up a little bit. So when I first got it in 2002, it affected my life because I had down days where I could go days and do okay, and then I would have a down day, whether it was a migraine or whether it was the rheumatoid came in or the fibro, and I could manage it. I was coaching my son's basketball team. I was being a teacher and PE teacher and really good shape and all of those things at that time, and coaching boys basketball games and doing all of this stuff. So I could travel, I could do that. So I had a lot of normalcy at that time because I could function and be able to, it was more like a down time rather than a down day. And so that made it easy. And I continued that probably all the way through. And I would have other times where I would be down. I'm not trying to say it was easy during that time. It was never easy, but it was more functionable where I could function within the disability. And then in 2015, it started a progressive time where it became so bad that I wasn't able to function in the disease for sometimes weeks on end, or at least days on end. And so that became where my disease was making my schedule for me rather than I was making my schedule for me. And I had many years where I could make my schedule for me. I could plan to do something and then I could do it. Whether I went down or not, those were things that happened. But most of the time, when I said I could do something, I was able to do it. Now I have to put a precursor to everything is if I'm able to. I say, I would like to do this if I'm able to. Even this thing that we're doing right now, I can do this if I'm able to. And that's just my answer nowadays.
Yeah.
So it's affected my life in a more impactful way since about 2016. What happened in 2015 is they found that I was on a medication called Remicade, and I was using that to slow the progression of the rheumatoid arthritis. For some reason, I went in and got a test that summer, and I had a very high count of lupus in my body, and I was starting to feel all the things. And I had just gone back to school and got my degree in psychology at that time, and I was going through all this while having lupus. And I just didn't know where all the pain was from. I had lost a family member, so there was a lot of stress, and so I didn't know what all was happening. But then in 2016, my body just was going down. Actually, let me go back a little bit. At the end of 2015, I was able to come out of the lupus. I was off the Remicade, and they put me on another medication, and within 3 months, the lupus disappeared. So my body recovered, I was able to travel, and I thought my life was going to take back on the way it was before. Mm-hmm. And then in 2016, for some reason, the medication wasn't working, and then I had to go on another medication and another medication. And so it was just a trail of all these trying different things, and it was really hard. I would have sometimes a week in bed. I would have days in bed at a time. I'm not a person that likes to lay around or sit around. So I like to be going and doing things. And so that was really hard for me. And it really impacted me. At the time, it impacted me because it made me feel so frustrated because I couldn't do what I wanted to do. But then later, as time went on, it started to make some situational depression in me because I was starting to devalue who I was and devalue me as a person in my own head. And I was fighting that because I felt like the disability made me who I was. Yeah. And that was a really hard fight, and it still is. And it's a continual fight. And when you have something that just takes over you, and it's made me different, and it's made me feel differently about myself, feel differently about people, feel differently about everything in life. Yeah. When you have something that is that big and takes over you that much, it's really hard to mentally balance all of that.
Yeah. And the loss, like you were going to continue with your education.
Right.
And into being a therapist.
Right.
And you had to drop that because you couldn't do it. I remember you not being able to think back then, and being able to focus to where you could actually follow through and do all of that. That was a huge loss.
It was a huge loss.
Yeah, so that was a big deal. So how has your chronic illness impacted your marriage?
That's a lot too. I married a guy I've been married before him, obviously. I came out of that physically abusive relationship before. And so I married a guy that I had known for a long time, and I felt like he was safe, but I had no idea because I was like I said, I was in that functioning stage of rheumatoid. And so I was really independent, and I was getting my degree, and I was going to get a job, and I was going to do my thing. And then all of a sudden everything flipped in 2016, and this guy that I was dating for 2 years, all of a sudden I had to become more dependent on him. And he didn't have to help me, but he helped me when I needed help, because I didn't have a lot of help outside of things, because it was hard for me to reach out to family or friends and ask them for help, because there was such a radical change, and I didn't really understand everything myself. So I ended up relying on him a lot more, and it changed our relationship. It changed it for me, and it changed it for him. And it still does today. He doesn't have this person that I was before, and I just, I was a spunky, like to sing and dance and, do all these things. And I guess I would say I was fun. I had a fun personality. I had a fun sense of humor. And I don't I'm not going to say I don't have those things, but all those things take energy. And a lot of times I don't have the energy that puts that out, even though it came naturally for me. And that was a part of me that I liked. It was a part of me that I didn't know how to find because all this other stuff was burying me. So then he's feeling like, where's this woman that I started with probably? And he's feeling frustrated because I'm changing so much. And then he's becoming like a caretaker and not just a husband. And he's having to help me. At one point in time in 2017, there were times where I would be down for days at a time and he would bring me my meal. And we had gotten married and he would bring me my meals. And because I couldn't even function, or he had to help me walk to the bathroom. And so that was really hard and humiliating. And so it really changed the dynamic of our relationship. I think for the most part, it actually was okay. But then I think it just got to be a lot, like right around 2021 maybe, because he himself, had a TIA, which is a small stroke. And so that affected him and made him not as strong. And then it just put a lot more pressure on our marriage. And so it became a very hard thing to do. It wasn't just, marriage is hard enough when you just have, I don't want to say normal, but when you have a working body and mind that functions well and can do all the things, and then you have not one at all. And it's so much different to try to make that work. And then when you have the other person not having it either because he had his small stroke. So it just became very hard. What I depended on before I couldn't. And so it became hard on him because then he couldn't do it. And so it just created, I will say, some scars for us, and that we still have to work through today.
Well, and part of that is related to both of you being raised in a dysfunctional family and having traumatic relationships, prior relationships and stuff where you've each got your, trauma that you react to and that kind of thing. And you've really had a lot of issues to deal with in your marriage. It's been pretty crazy as far as family stuff and nonstop. So, but what is the thing that you talk about when you say it doesn't help when I'm reacting out of pain brain? What do you mean by that? And how does that affect your relationships?
Well, I think people that have chronic pain changes your personality. Well, there's different degrees of pain. That's a very general thing to say, pain. People can be I've gone to pain management. So if people have gone to pain management, they know there's different degrees of pain. And so if you can operate in like say a ratio of 1 to 10, so if you're operating like in a 1 to 4 ratio, your pain is subdued pain. It's chronic and it's consistent, but it's subdued. And so you can function within that. And then it creeps up a little bit more and you deal with like a 4 to 6 range. And so you're going to have discomfort. And so that discomfort almost fights your mental ability to be yourself, to have your personality, to have your sense of humor, to have your thought process even working right. And also it can affect my speech. If the rheumatoid comes in my jaw joints and I have what I call pain brain, which is, to me, it's anything over a 6 level. It can affect what I say. I actually have to go slower in what I'm saying, or not slower in what I'm saying, but slower in what I'm thinking, and then cause my answers to come a little slower to say them because of the pain brain. And then I say if it's an 8, I medicate. And what I mean by medicate is pretty much whatever you take for medication. And I did take pain pills and Xanax. I took like a half of Norco and a half of Xanax for a long time, and that seemed to be functioning. But my body got really weird I know weird's not a medical term, but it got very difficult to have any medication in my body. And so I decided to go on some natural things instead. And so with that, I could function with the pain if I had the help. But then now, if it's 8, I have natural things, like I take things that are different. Like it's called kratom, and I take what's called kava and GABA. And GABA is, a form of what's in gabapentin, but it's in a natural form. So I take those. One of them's for the nerve and Because what happens with pain is the interesting thing is pain actually affects your nerves. Of course, fibromyalgia is all nerves. So you've got that. And so then you have the rheumatoid pain. So you have this pain that's in your joints, and then it comes and affects your nerves. So you just pretty much have a whole party of pain in your body.
Right.
And that's where that affects your brain, your personality, really your anything. And I think it makes you just sit down and want to be quiet and have some kind of outlet, whether that's like watch something on TV or get on your phone, or, I mean, everybody has different outlets, shop online, or, whatever your thing is. But it's almost like you can't sit there and function in that pain anymore. You have to have an outlet to get out. If nothing else is working, you have to figure out something else. And a lot of times I can't read in that time because I will get migraines because everything is so tense in my body. It just will not be relaxed enough to read.
So I'm hearing you say that it's hard to think, and it's even hard to formulate thoughts. And I would say when you're in relationship struggles or in a relationship, that you have to be able to do both of those things. You have to be able to think about what's happening and process it in a balanced way, and then kind of think about it, and maybe it's articulate something. But when it sounds like when you're in pain brain, you're going to be reactive. You're not going to be able to process. You're not going to be able to formulate thoughts. You're not going to be able to reason and be really balanced, which is, I think, important for people to understand about themselves.
Right. And
because that helps you understand, like, why am I reacting this way? Why am I not able to be more self-controlled? Or why did if you're somebody who pops off and says something, then, it's like, why did those words come out of my mouth? And you need a lot of self-acceptance, and you need a lot of compassion towards yourself when you're dealing with a chronic illness, because otherwise you can really beat yourself up and be really down on yourself.
Well, I think too is really important. People that are listening that deal with chronic pain, I would really recommend seeking out some pain management, because they kind of tell you how, they don't tell you what to take. Obviously, you're working with your doctor on that, but they kind of show you your inabilities and show you boundaries that are healthy boundaries that make it okay for you to do certain things. Like, let's say if I'm in a lot of pain and I'm in a 1 to 10, I'm in an 8 level, that's not a time for me to have a sensitive conversation, whether it's with my husband or anybody else for that matter. But if I have that conversation at that time, I know in my own head that that's not using good wisdom, because I'm going to be reactionary instead of responding or responsive, because I don't have the ability to process what they're saying to me in the same way that I would in the lower range of pain, like 1 to 4-ish probably. I could process that and have good coping skills and be able to move further with all that. But in that probably anywhere from 6 to 8, that function is not there.
Yeah.
And so it gets really frustrating, I'm sure, for my husband, because there are times where I can say, I can't talk about that now. And, there's times where he says, oh, you could never talk about it. Well, I can understand he gets frustrated. I would be frustrated too. So that makes it very difficult, because he wants to talk about something when he wants to talk about, like any of us would. But I don't have the capability of being able to give him the time when he needs it. And sometimes that works bad for him, and it also works bad for me, because what if I need to talk about something? Then I can't talk about what I need to talk about when I want to talk about it, or when I need to talk about it, because my brain is not working in that way, and it's not going to be a good time for me to sit down and even talk about something that might be something important to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And that's the way that it affects you, and that's frustrating. Because you feel like you're always putting your life on hold.
Very, yeah.
Right? And waiting for the time. And I know from the loved ones that I have that have chronic illness, you never know what days it's going to hit you. Mm-hmm. So you feel like you've lost control of your life.
Totally.
Which is really difficult, which goes into the next question. How has it affected your mental health?
I think for me, it affected my mental health very, very early on. But my Aunt Patty, she was my godmother, she had rheumatoid arthritis, and she just had such a great attitude with it. And it was back in the day where they did what's called the gold shots. And the gold shots were just more for pain. They didn't really help her with the stopping of it. And she inevitably passed away from a heart issue brought on by rheumatoid arthritis in 2015. But for me, I was able to have that model. And that really helped me because I really looked up to her all my life. But looking up to her with what she had to deal with made it even more so for me. And I'm really thankful I had that model. But as time went on, and probably 2018, I want to say probably the last 4 years, I have been getting off of some harsh medications. And I don't mean harsh like they're bad or anything. I just mean they were bad for my body because we all respond differently to medication. And I was on what's called Cymbalta, which is helpful to a lot of people, but it went toxic in my body, and prednisone. And prednisone is a good medication for going on it for a couple of weeks and getting relief, but they kept me on it for 6 years. And I had 2 rheumatologists, and they just really did me wrong. And so I was on it for too long, and it started to create havoc in my body. And so going off the Cymbalta, it did mentally, it just made me question my purpose and even being here and if I needed to be here. And I wasn't really one to have that focus, but I would lift up my hands and tell God to just take me to heaven because I didn't know what I should do, and I couldn't take any more of what I was going through. And I went through that for probably a year on coming off the Cymbalta because it took me about 2.5 years to get off of it. But then the prednisone did the same thing. And the prednisone brought on the pain so bad. So you have a combination where you have some mental things going on because of the withdrawal of the drug in your body that you were on for too long. So it had acclimated in your body. And so the absence of that drug just allowed my body to have, it just really went through the harsh withdrawals. And so mentally it affected me, but it brought on all the pain. And I didn't realize prednisone does help you. My doctor said it's your best friend and your worst enemy. So it helps you, but what you have to go through in order to have that help is hard. And so I will say the mental of what the going off of the drugs was actually worse, I think, than the mental that I was already going through from the disabilities. Yeah. And I've always struggled with, I was always able to balance the mental stuff. And I was really strong that way, and I was always able to balance it. So even though I couldn't do it, would mess with me, and then I would figure out ways that I could work through that and balance through that. And being grateful was a huge thing, and finding things that you're grateful for, that was really something that helped me back in the day. But for some reason, when I was going off the medications, that grateful thing or the other things, it was really hard to get to a point to get to something that helped me. Yeah. And it was, I reached out a few times, but it's even hard to reach out because I was always so strong before. And now I was going through all this mentally weak scenarios that people that really knew me were like, why is this you? Why are you going through this? And kind of got funny with me at times because they didn't understand. And so it's just, I think you just have to find some close people to you that you can call and have them help you balance. Yeah. Because your coping skills aren't working at that time. Your processing skills aren't working at that time. And it's not your fault. Yeah. And it's the medication or the going off the medication. Both are different in how they act in your body and affect you. And it's just, or in your mind. And it's just a matter of you being patient with it. Yeah. And just getting the help that you need, whether it's going and seeing a doctor or a counselor or any of those things that can help you balance those things while you're not able to.
And the other thing you mentioned to me was that if you know that you need to be informed as to what the side effects are before you start taking something, so you'll be able to recognize if a problem that you're having is related to a side effect, and you can let your doctor know, as rather than just another part of being sick or a problem or what. So you're saying you would like to know what the side effects are. And then I shared with you that my loved one with chronic illness, she doesn't want to know what the side effects are because she doesn't want to be anxious about them and be like hypersensitive to what it is in her body. But she always tells me, you read them. And then if I tell you that I'm experiencing something and you know it's related to a medication, you'll be able to recognize it. So I think both of those are really helpful.
I think your loved one was very smart in doing that. I didn't think about that, but when you are going through this, you're very sensitive or can be very sensitive. And I will say this before I talk about the side effects or how the side effects affected me, I guess. I think it's very smart for her to tell you to read them, and then if she has them, because when you read them mentally, sometimes our mind does weird things. Yeah. And so mentally you can take those on and we can feel like we're having some of those side effects and we can process that, and it kind of trips us out. And so I think it would be better off to have some kind of advocate read the side effects and then allow us to just go into it if we're going into on the medicine, and then reach out to them if there is anything different, rather than having that frame of mind of knowing the side effects.
Yeah.
I think that's really smart.
Yeah.
And for me, I never had any drug side effects, and I was on medicine since 2002. I never experienced any side effects, maybe a headache here, whatever. It was very minor, and I was always so excited about, oh, okay, I can take this medicine, I'll be fine. And then in 2015, when the medication gave me lupus, and that was the first time I'd ever had a medication-induced disease in my body. And so once that started, and then unfortunately there were some other medication mistakes by doctors that actually really impacted my body, and I think it made my body so sensitive to anything now. And I think that's one thing that I will say for people that are going through chronic pain with your doctor is I have a great general doctor. My rheumatologists haven't been as great, but my doctor said, Wendy, you have to think about, we go to medical school so that we can diagnose and prescribe medicine. That's what they do in medical school.
Right.
So they don't know any homeopathic, they don't know any natural, they don't know counseling, they don't know, they can prescribe you counseling, but they don't really know how that affects us or how that helps us. They just don't know those things. So we can get mad at them, but we can actually go and be our own advocate or have somebody that you trust help you with that, because you need that. You don't need to just blankly go, okay, this doctor says you should go on this medicine. And you, in that point, for instance, in 2018, both my knees were swollen and we were going to take a trip to Tahoe, and I was really excited to go. And so I'm laying down, icing my knees, and the doctor prescribed 50 milligrams of prednisone so that I could get up and walk. And so I went for it because I wanted to walk that bad. Well, I may or may not should have gone on the prednisone. But when we are desperate, and we get desperate,
yes,
because we're in pain and we want to function normal, that's all we want. And when we're desperate like that, it's not a place for us to make those decisions. So if you're in chronic pain and your doctor's telling you to go on something, please look up the information, look up the side effects. It'd be better if you had an advocate do it with you, so you didn't have to take everything on yourself. But if you have to do that, then try to detach yourself from what you're reading in the side effects and just use it for informational use only. It's hard to have that.
To make a decision where you're going to say, I'm willing to potentially get this benefit and to risk these side effects. It is something that you have to decide, right, because there are always side effects with drugs. And like you're explaining, the more sensitive your body gets, and, right, and maybe the more the disease progresses and your body has had the experience with medication, the more that you're going to experience. That's been your case.
Right.
That's been the case of the loved ones I have that have been on a lot of medication.
Well,
so
the doctors,
I can kind of get that.
For me, the doctors, one thing didn't work. They put me on another thing. They put me on another thing, but I let them do it.
Yes.
I said, okay, because I was so desperate.
Even starting a couple things at the same time, which is
exactly what you should never do, by the way. Yeah. If the doctor wants to put you on 2 medications, be really careful. At least give yourself maybe 2 weeks to a month in between, I would recommend. I'm not a doctor. This is just my own suggestion from my experience. But because you're going to have side effects from medicines, or you might, it doesn't mean you will, you're going to know what those side effects are going on in your body. If you go on 2 or 3 medications at the same time, you don't know where the side effects are coming from. And if you're going off a medication, try to wait until you're almost off to start the new one. I know that's hard to say that, and I have lived it, but I think you're doing your body a disjustice when you go on something while you're getting off something. I know that there's a need for relief, but try to find something else in the interim of that, because you don't know the side effects again. And I was telling somebody the other day, I don't remember, they were talking about life and all the things they're doing in their life. And I'll go on, one of my escapes in an unhealthy way sometimes is Instagram. And I'll go on there, and I really should not be on there. And I'm not talking bad about social media in a sense, but I go on and look at everybody else's happy reel and what I don't have in my life. So it actually can mess with me mentally.
Totally.
And so I have to be careful. I think I mentioned to somebody, I'm like, what I miss the most is waking up and making a plan for my day and feeling like I can just go do anything. I don't wake up ever and feel like I can do anything I want in that day. There's always a precursor, whether I feel like I can do it or not, or I'm up to it. And I don't have that. I don't know if it's a luxury. It's just something, the human body, we normally get up every day and we can go and have our day and plan it and do whatever we want in that day. And I cannot do that.
No.
And so, and I haven't been able to for a while.
And
years.
That's a huge loss. So
Yes.
that puts us right into the next question, which is the grief cycle. The grief cycle is what we feel when we have any loss in our life. And the cycles, and they don't go necessarily perfectly in this order. They can flip back and forth. But denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and then acceptance.
Right.
And they're all necessary to get to acceptance. So talk about how you've had to work through this to get to the point, and if you are at the point of acceptance, and do you stay there?
Well, I will say this is really hard, and I'm not there. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. I'd like to be there. It's really hard. Like I said, just I can't wake up and do what I want to do. And so it's really hard because, unfortunately, some of the bad habits that I learned growing up, where I was never good enough. And so I have put that on me still today. I'm better than I used to be, but I will tell you the impact on pain and the impact on medicine, the impact on losing things in your life and all the things that are going on, and they're big things, they take away from you and they take away from who you are. And so I beat myself up. I feel less than. I feel not worthy sometimes, and I go through that. And I know in my head, I mean, I've gone through school. I know what I even tell other women that call me. I have women that call me asking me to help them through things or do this, and I can help them and I can tell them what to do. And I don't always follow it. I try, but I can't always do it. And I think that we have to be prepared for that. If we're prepared, it really helps us. And when I say prepared is, I had a group of women that we went up to the mountains together, and a lot of them are going through so much. And I told them to have what's called a tool belt, and it's all in your mind, but it's something that you have where you can pick 5 songs that make you happy and 5 maybe spiritual songs or Christian songs. And you have a list of 5 people that you can call, and you have 5 Bible verses that you can go, and nothing is in any order, of course, but you can go to those things. And then when none of those work, you can try to start over in them, or you can reach out. Like, I know when I get to a level where I'm not okay, and I can call you, or I can call somebody and say, I'm not okay right now, and I need you to process this for me. And it is really hard and it's humiliating, but you know what? That is what your need is at that time. And you need to get through that need. It's really important. So I think that the biggest thing for us to have with that is some kind of resources for us.
Yeah.
And I think that exercise is a huge thing. And I think friendships are a huge thing. Obviously, church and having that, and having things that are going to encourage us, and not having people in our lives that bring us down. And I don't mean just because they have something, everybody has a moment where they're mad at somebody. I mean the consistent put downs. That's really hard because you're already beating up on yourself from the chronic disease or pain. And then you have somebody else burdening you with more stuff. Is you really have to try to balance and have boundaries with people that are not healthy. And it's hard to do because when you feel unworthy, you don't feel like you're, worthy to tell this person not to do something. But I think it's the best thing for you to do. And it's very hard to do, but it's the best thing for you to do, to not have that interaction constant, that you have to work on that, plus everything else that you have overloading you at the same time.
Well, I think you have to keep the fact you have with the recognizing, okay, it's not me, it's the illness. Almost
Right.
like saying, it's my illness that's making me like this. This isn't who I am.
Right.
And so you don't lose fact that your illness is separate from who you are. It becomes so much of your identity because it's such a big part of your life. But what about the anger? Have you ever been angry with God and been like, what is the deal? Like, why does this not get better? Why did this medication not work for me? Why am I still in pain? I mean, what are your conversations like with God?
Well, let me say before I answer that, no conversation is going to be perfect with chronic illness. And I can't remember because my memory sometimes goes, did I answer the last question? Okay.
You talked about the loss, how much loss
Okay.
you've had. We
Okay.
didn't go through the specific stages, but the anger is one of those
Okay,
stages.
we can go through
So
the
I'm-
grieving. I that's right. It was the grieving.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but you
Yeah.
did talk about the loss. And
Okay.
you talked about
we
the
can
sadness.
touch on the grieving if you want.
Yeah,
So,
but that's okay.
but
Let's
yeah,
just talk
okay.
about a couple of the stages that you kind of missed in your answer. So the
Okay.
anger, where's the anger? How does that look? And with the bargaining, the anger,
Yeah.
and then the bargaining with God.
Well, let me just say, I've always considered myself, I'm 55, I rededicated my life to the Lord when I was 28. I always considered myself a strong Christian. I knew who God was. This might make me a little emotional too. I knew who he was. I knew who he was in my life. I knew who he was for other people's life. And I wasn't like radical where I was the Jesus freak type or whatever, but I loved on people and I told them about God. And I can say the last 2 years of my life, at least, that I've been mad at God. I don't understand. So many people have prayed for me. I don't understand why he doesn't help me. I don't understand. Now, that's not to say that, I have a minor degree in biblical studies, so I know a lot in my head. And I'm also the daughter of a pastor and grew up as, my dad being a pastor from the time I was 18 on. He was a coach before that. But I saw some radical things being a Christian. And I know a lot in my head. But right now in my heart, it gets shuffled because of what I'm going through. And how I feel about God. And I feel distanced from God, which isn't a great feeling, but I feel distanced, but I still talk to him every day. I don't always read every day like I used to. I get discouraged a lot more. The anger is there. And sometimes the anger comes up, and I will say I've taken it out on Mark. I'm in a place right now where I recognize my anger. Now, let me tell you, when you're coming off of prednisone is a steroid. And you hear all kinds of sayings about roids and about all that. Well, it's all true. And I was on very high dose at first and came down. And so when you're getting off of steroids that you're on for 6 years and your body is very acclimated to them, your body goes through it. It's a really anxious thing. It makes you very anxious. But then the anger comes in, and I would take it out on Mark. And I was mean at times, and I'm not a mean person. I don't desire to hurt people. And I've always desired to help people. That's why I'm doing this. But I would get mean. And so then I would have to go apologize, but then I'd get mean again. So finally, as I got down enough on the prednisone, I was feeling like I was having my mind back. Like I don't feel like I had the brain fog as much. I don't feel like you have that drug feeling. So, but it's in spurts. This morning I didn't have it. Now, thank you God, I have it. So it just comes and goes in spurts. So when the anger comes on and I have my frame of mind, I can balance and negotiate things in my head and go, okay, I'm upset, I'm angry. What am I going to do with this? Did Mark create my anger? Did he do something to hurt me?
Mark being your husband.
Mark being my husband. So did he do this to hurt me? And then, maybe he did hurt my feelings on purpose or whatever, then I have to deal with that. But if he didn't, then I have to go, okay, so what is bringing on the anger? There's a lot of self-talk in chronic illness. And I believe that's healthy. And I kind of joke around and say I talk to myself and then I answer myself and I kind of laugh about it. But you know what you do when you have chronic pain and you have a chronic disease? Because you're alone a lot. So I have to negotiate that in my head. And okay, so if he didn't create the anger, then I don't need to take it out on him. It's not his fault. And so what do I need to do to get rid of the anger? So then I have to figure out a healthy outlet, whether that be part of the tool belt that I explained earlier, whether that be go and get on Instagram or Facebook or go try to read. I do read stuff online about medications and about rheumatoid and all that. So those are things that I can do that's a healthy outlet, whether I can go take a walk if I'm physically able to take a walk. Then I can go and get away from the scenario with my husband and I can go and try to balance my own brain. And that is very helpful. And that is something that's just been in the last couple months that I've been able to be better at that. And even though I feel all overwhelmed on one side, I can detach from that and go, okay, how do I need to handle what's going on right now? And that is really hard. And those of you out there that are going through chronic pain or chronic disease or autoimmune disease, don't get discouraged. It takes you over. Mm-hmm. And don't get discouraged. You're not doing anything wrong that it takes you over. You're not doing anything wrong that your brain's not working. You're not doing anything wrong that your body's not working. Don't beat yourself up on it, because what you don't realize is that when your body gets stressed, it actually makes it worse.
Yes, totally.
And so if you get mad at yourself and you get hard on yourself, it's only going to make it worse. And somebody told me, I was talking to this lady, I work with this lady that's helping me on my nutritional stuff. And she said, did you exercise today? And, oh my gosh, I'm too much pain. And she goes, well, Wendy, you're going to be in pain whether you exercise or not. So why don't you exercise? Because that could actually help you. And it was like this epiphany that I'd never thought about. And so I encourage you that even if it's just stretching, even if it's just doing like a really low impact yoga or, something like that, sometimes I just blast a song and dance to it because it makes me happy. And I can't always get through the whole song, but if I can get through the verse and the chorus, if I'm in pain, it usually lifts my spirits.
Yeah.
And so if you know me, I like to put on a disco song and dance to it. So, and it helps me get through it, and it actually can change your brain and what it's going through. If you do something, it's like a disruption, and you get that disruption and it does something for you and it lifts your spirits, it gets all your stuff going on and you get your happy endorphins, and that really helps balance everything you're going through in your brain.
So the next question is, give the listeners who are caregivers tips on how to support their family member with a chronic illness. What are some of the things that you would say, like, keep this in mind, that this is super helpful for your loved one?
Well, I will say, being a caregiver, it's really hard. Yes. It's really, really hard. And I will give props to my husband on that, is he does pretty good with it. He is human and he does make mistakes, but he does pretty good with it. And if it got turned around when he had knee surgery and I had to take care of him, he was horrible. So I remind him of that when I have a bad day. I'm like, I'm still not as bad as you were. So it is hard for the person going through it. And if you're a caretaker, you are not going to fix them. And you can't even try. You can help them and aid them, but don't try to fix them. And I think that if you fix them, they are going to feel more pressure from you. And it's pressure that they don't need because they're already trying to do that for themselves. I would say be an encouragement, but really be careful with what you're saying. And it's a sensitivity thing. There's going to be times where you're going to go and you're going to be not thanked and you're going to be not recognized because they're in their head and they're in so much pain and they can't see out. And it's not your fault. I've told Mark, this isn't your fault. This is me. But there's going to be times where the person can talk and explain what they're going through, and that was really helpful, but that's not always the case, and nor can they. But I will say, if you need to write down notes of things that maybe something triggers them and you realize what triggers them, then you don't do it again or try not to do it again. There's things that you're not going to be able to talk to them about when you need to talk to them about. Don't get discouraged. It's not your fault, and it's not their fault either. And that's a thing to really realize, because sometimes the caretaker can get frustrated at the patient or the person that's going through the disability and think, why aren't they just trying? Well, they are trying, but it's just you're not seeing the effort because a lot of it's behind the scenes. It's trying to balance the pain, trying to balance the mental. I mean, it really changes you mentally when you have chronic pain. And so I would say just be patient, and if you feel like you're not appreciated, when you see that they're doing pretty good, sit down and talk to them, because it's not that you should just be not appreciated and you should have to feel like that, because that's not right either. But I think you have to really understand where they're at in order to talk about it. And what are some of the things that you need? Do you need them to say thank you when they do stuff, when you do stuff for them? Do you need, what are things that you need that are going to help you? Do you need to have like a day off where you're doing something else? Do you need to have like an outlet going out with friends? Or Mark likes to fish, so he can go fishing or something.
So do you want the person that's your caregiver to go to not give up their whole life for you? Would it make you feel better if that person felt free to still pursue things that they wanted to do on their own?
I think that depends on the mode you're in. I will say mentally, right now, thinking about it, of course I want him to have his normal life. Is that really going to happen? No, because he is a caretaker, and when I go down, he ends up helping me. I'm a lot more self-sufficient than I have been in the past, but you want them to have the time that they need to have to get away, to do some things. Like my husband's visiting his granddaughter and he's doing it on his own, and that makes me sad, yes, but it's also better that I'm not there, because right now my body's not working very well, and that would make it a harder trip. So I think that when you can think through and process things, I don't want to say that we get selfish in chronic pain, but it probably makes us more self-focused, because we're thinking of how we're going to get through this, how we're going to balance the pain, what we're going to be able to do. There's so much self-focus in the process of it all that it can look like we're selfish. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something to remember, because I don't want to be a selfish person, but I feel like there's a lot on myself, and I'm obviously think about myself. So that's something that I can tell my husband and tell him that. So because he's probably thinking it sometimes that I'm selfish. So if I tell him that, check in on your caretaker. I would say if you have it where it's a husband or wife or a child, even children, when they're up to a certain age, they can start feeling those things and thinking through those things. Check in with them. How are you doing? Is there anything that's bothering you? Can we work through something? Do we need to talk about anything? I think the person that is disabled, I think it's important for them to understand that there is a person out there that's giving things up for them, that they should check on them, that they should make sure that everything's okay. Because caretakers, they can lose themselves too. And then you have the disabled person had lost himself or herself, and you have the caretaker that lost himself or herself. So you've got two lost people. It's not going to function well for long.
Nope.
So you really have to be able to communicate. And I know that if it's really bad, and I mean bad to where you're in bed and you are curled up in pain and crying and can't focus and do that stuff, that's not the time to talk about it. So just give yourself time, but maybe reach out to him if you notice him a little different, or her. Just say, I know that we need to talk, but I'm really in a lot of pain right now. Can we wait till this calms down? And make appointment times that you might have to change to be able to talk. Like, let's say Friday night is your talk night. If you're able and your body's able to do it, then you do it. But make sure that that person is giving things up for you, and that person is giving up parts of their life for you. And it's a very thankless job. And I think it's a good thing that if you're in your right mind in your pain, that you talk to that person and you make sure that person's okay.
Yeah. And I'm a caregiver to multiple family members, some aging parents, some others due to physical illness and mental illness. So I know what it's like to be in that caregiver spot. And I think that it's really important that people do what you just said, which is you want the chronically ill person to recognize that it is hard on the caregiver, but you also, as a caregiver, you have to admit that it's hard for you and give yourself grace. It is increased pressure. It often is almost always increased financial pressure. You do carry an increased load because of the things the person can't do that you have to do for them. It does have lifestyle limitations. It has big impacts on relationships. So, part of working through things is to face reality, not to be in denial, is to be able to say, hey, this is hard for me. And then you recognize, well, that, like you said, you got to take care of yourself too. And I have often said, and it sounds really radical, but I know you've heard me say it, that when you're taking care of somebody, or you've got somebody in your life that requires to be taken care of, that sometimes you have to put yourself first, and you have to make sure that you're able to function. And that's, like you said, that depends. Maybe you don't get to, because that's the day your person is down and you've got to be there. Then you can't put yourself first. But there are times that you have to say, if you have this mindset of no matter what, I've got to be at this person's beck and call and take care of them, it becomes too much and you will become resentful. So you have to figure out, how do I live my life and fulfill my caregiving responsibilities to this person because I care about this person. But at the same time, you don't deny that the right that you have to live your own life, or the responsibility to live your life. It's a little bit different with yours as a spouse. Mine is a different family relationship.
Well, too, I want to say really quick, on the caretaker thing, you have to be careful that the person that is disabled and going through all that, it's very hard on them.
Yes.
And so if you come on strong or too much, it can be suffocating for the disabled person, and they could come out in anger from that.
Exactly.
So be sensitive to it's like you're being sensitive, you're a team, and you're being sensitive to each other. The disabled person needs to make sure that the person helping is okay, and that maybe they didn't say or do anything to hurt feelings or anything like that. I think that's really important, and I think it's something you do more than once. I think it's something you do consistently, and the other person has to make sure that they're not coming on too strong, and you have to be able to let that person try to do stuff. Like, if the person's having difficulty doing something, don't just run in and do it for them.
Right.
Let that disabled person try to do that, because you don't know what that feels like when you're disabled, you're not able to do much, and then you actually accomplish something. It really does something for the disabled person. It helps them a ton, and nothing anybody's going to say or do is going to help more than that disabled person able to accomplish something.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the only other thing I can think of that I often tell people and remind myself is, you do, just like we were talking about the grief process for accepting your chronic illness, you do also have to grieve the loss of the person in the relationship with you that can't be, as you said, because of the chronic illness. So because grieving is healthy, and it makes you come to terms with the loss. And then when you come out on the other end of acceptance, then you're in a better place to deal with it and to make decisions and to do them in a healthy way, and to not have anger and to not have the resentment and to not go back and forth between the struggle. And yeah, chronic illness is up and down, so it doesn't mean that will never happen. But I think you really do have to grieve the loss of the life that you can't have because of the chronic illness, because it is a loss for the person who's in the relationship too.
Right.
It's a huge loss because, like you said, there's things I can't do. There's all kinds of things you would do with your husband that you cannot do.
Right.
And you can't even remember, you guys wanted to go camping and you really wanted to enjoy the camper and you were all excited, and it didn't really work as well because of the chronic illness. It was really hard. So,
I think with the whole thing with the grieving, I will say really quick is I think you need to be sensitive to yourself when you're in having the disabilities. And if you're not able to grieve, if there's not a healthy grieving going on, maybe you're journaling, maybe you're taking classes like Carla's or others that help that and balance and having boundaries and all of those things, then please reach out. It's a little bit more difficult to reach out to a friend ongoing because they're not really schooled. They don't know all the things, and unless, they are schooled, and plus they don't feel all the things you feel. But if you need to reach out to them in that time that I was saying where you're going through it and you need help in that moment, that's totally okay to reach out to anybody you feel comfortable with. But if you're mentally not grieving through the things, it really puts a kink in your mental stability to not go through that grieving. And I can say from my own experience that I have not done that well. And it puts, I know kink's probably not a medical term, but it puts a disruption in your mental stability in the disability. And so I would say to reach out and get therapy and get counseling for that. And have it be somebody recommend somebody that knows disabilities, like they know what to do with that, because that's going to help you. They put things in order for you. I'm sure there's lots of resources online with that kind of stuff, but there's things that you can do to help your process of grieving. And journaling can be really helpful because you can always go back a month and say, what was I doing here? And I always did when I was journaling, I should get back to it. But when I was journaling a lot, I would do what's called a high-low. And I would say something that happened good in my day, something that was the high. And then I would say something low, something that happened that I didn't like in that day. And so I could just see where I was. And sometimes that helps you because it can be where you were, but then you're further ahead. And that can also be encouraging from somebody that has disabilities. So I think you have to understand that when you have physical disabilities, you also have mental things going on. It doesn't mean that you're mentally something's wrong with you. It just means it affects your brain and it affects how you think. It affects what you, like I said, your personality, everything. And so you have to protect your mind in that disability and to be able to be aware of that.
Yeah. So with an hour's already passed.
Oh my gosh.
It goes by really fast. And I think we could talk about it for another hour.
Oh, you and I always can.
So I think we've said a lot of things that will be helpful to people listening, both with the chronic illness and also their loved ones, to help them better understand the chronic illness.
Yes.
And so I'd like you to leave those with chronic illness themselves or a loved one who's taking care of them, a message of hope.
She didn't write this question down.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Oh
my gosh, I didn't read this one. I don't remember it. You know what? I can give them a question or a statement of hope. One, I'll give you a couple. One, tomorrow's a new day. Another one, this might look different in an hour. This might look different in a couple hours. Never go with the feeling of overwhelm and distraught that you have in the moment, because it will change. And your ability could change. Your disability might not hurt as much in an hour. If you're having chronic pain and you're having it every day, it fluctuates. So when that overwhelm happens, that's why I say reach out in that time and get yourself through that time. But realize that that is not going to be the way you are forever. And I will say praying helps, journaling helps. all those things. And for me, hope, I get a lot of hope when I help other people. Like when I sit down, I'm doing this, I will get hope from this. And I help Carla with her classes. And there's been times where I've come to the class with a walker or a cane or other elements that have made it very hard for me to go. But I always leave and feel better because I poured out into somebody else. And I think it's really important in our lives that if we pour out in somebody else, that we have to refill somehow. We have to have self-care. Think of things that you can do and your abilities that you can do to have self-care. If that means you go and do a facial in the bathroom, if that means that you go have your hair done, if that means that you go take a walk, just figure out things that are going to change the element and get you out of the pattern that you're in. And I think that gives you hope. And just know that it may be a forever thing, but that feeling that you have at that particular moment doesn't mean that feeling's a forever thing.
Yeah, I really like that. I often say that. There's one of the posts that I put up on Facebook that says, even though your circumstances might not change, your feelings about them and your ability to deal with them will change.
Yep.
And I think that's a great thing to leave people with. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to Change My Relationship. And I hope you'll be back to hear the next podcast. And also, please share this with your friends, and especially those that you know whose lives have been impacted by chronic illness. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Change My Relationship. We hope you will subscribe to these podcasts and share them with your friends. Carla would love to hear from you. She welcomes ideas for future podcasts as well as your feedback on how the podcast have helped your life and relationships. You can email her at carla@changemyrelationship.com. For more information on Change My Relationship and Carla Downing's ministry, including her books, studies, devotionals, podcast, and YouTube videos, visit changemyrelationship.com.